video is on explanations for obedience, and Milgram offered two explanations for why people obey, and these are the agentic state and legitimacy of authority. So we're going to outline and evaluate both of those. The agentic state explanation says that people will obey because they feel as if they're doing something as an agent for someone else, which means that they wouldn't have done it by themselves, but they're acting on somebody else's wishes, which Milgram identified back in the 1970s. And that increases obedience. It causes the obedience because people don't feel responsible for what they're doing, especially if it's something like inflicting pain, like in the Milgram experiment, which you can see pictures of there. So they can maintain their positive self-image and just think, well, I'm doing something that somebody else has required of me, so it's not really my fault. Milgram carried out interviews at the end of the electric shock study to find out why people had continued to administer electric shocks, and a typical reply was something like, I wouldn't have done it by myself, I was just doing what I was told. And so that really showed Milgram that the individuals, the participants, didn't feel responsible for themselves. They felt responsible to the authority figure, but not for their actual actions. Milgram argued that people shift back and forth between an agentic state, so acting on behalf of someone else, and an autonomous state, which means acting on your own values and beliefs. And Milgram claimed that when you're in a situation where there is an authority figure, that the individual will no longer view themselves as acting out of their own purposes. So we've got there the photos that you can see of Milgram and one of the original participants. And if you watch the footage of that original participant in the experiment, and I'll put a link in the description below, he agonised over that. He would never have shocked the person in the other room without having been told to do it. So Milgram also identified that once a person has entered into the agentic state, then social etiquette plays a part in binding them to that activity, like shocking the learner, because once they've started something, they don't want to appear rude by breaking off that commitment. So once that participant had started shocking the learner, it becomes harder to actually stop the obedience. So we're going to just evaluate the agentic state first before we move on to the second explanation. And the agentic shift did not occur in Auschwitz. This is our first evaluation point. This is a criticism of the idea that the agentic state explains obedience. So the agentic shift, which means shifting between that agentic and autonomous state, is criticised by the behaviour of medical staff at Auschwitz. So the medical staff entered as caring medical professionals who had obviously taken a Hippocratic oath to look after the health of everybody, but they changed into people capable of carrying out lethal experiments on prisoners. And it's been suggested that their change in personality, their change in behaviour was gradual and irreversible due to carrying out these evil acts over a prolonged period, not because they were acting in the agentic state, and that they weren't shifting between the agentic and autonomous state, but that they had irreversibly changed. And another criticism of the agentic state explanation is that actually perhaps some people in the Milgram experiment weren't acting out of the agentic state, but actually out of cruelty and a desire to inflict pain on other people, and that taking part in the experiment had allowed them to express that. And this can also be backed up by the behaviour of the guards in the Stanford prison experiment, which we looked at when we saw conformity to social role. So we'll know that the guards became increasingly sadistic in that short time that they were with the prisoners, but they were not given any instructions by an authority figure. And it's argued that it was really just that some of the guards had a desire to be cruel, and so the agentic state doesn't explain that kind of behaviour. So the second explanation for obedience is called legitimacy of authority, and this refers to when a person obeys another due to their perceived social control in a situation, not due to their personal characteristics. Milgram believed that every situation we enter into, we have this expectation that somebody will be a legitimate authority figure. So if you think about it, if you go to a restaurant, you're looking for someone who works there so that you can see where to sit and how long you might have to wait. If you go into a supermarket, you might be looking for someone in a uniform who, if you're looking to find the tinned sardines, as I might be, then you're looking for, you need to ask someone, you're looking for someone in a uniform, and we have this shared expectation that someone is going to be an authority. So I've just mentioned like a couple of a supermarket uniform. If you go to a restaurant, you'll probably see all the waiting staff wearing a particular outfit usually. And so the person will have some kind of badge of authority, and so we've got a picture there of a police officer, which is a classic one because they literally have a badge of authority, plus they have the uniform and they have the equipment like walkie-talkies, and they might have a police baton depending on what country they're in. They might have other equipment. So the badge of authority, like a uniform or job title or rank, indicates that someone is in charge. And so we are going to obey legitimate authority figures. We will also allow the legitimate authority figure to define the situation for us, and we're going to accept their version of reality. So when we think about the Milgram experiment, in that picture there you can see the learner, teacher and experimenter, and you can see that the teacher is saying, "Are you sure I should be electrocuting that person in the next room? I think it's dangerous." And the experimenter says, "It's good, it's fine, it's all in the name of science," when really the teacher would have been able to hear the screams of that person in the next room. But they allow the authority figure, the legitimate authority figure, to define the situation for them. So, and also, if harmful orders are to be obeyed, the legitimate authority figure should have an institution to back them up. In this case, it was a university, but it could well be the military or the police force or something like that. So when we are evaluating the legitimacy of authority explanation, then the first thing we're looking at is a strength. We're looking at research, like Milgram's research. There was a study done where student participants watched a film of the Milgram experiment, and they were asked whom they blamed for causing harm to the learner. And all the participants identified the experimenter as responsible rather than the teacher, because he was the legitimate authority and the expert authority. He was seen as a scientist. So that is evidence that legitimacy of authority is an explanation for why people obey. We are going to follow the orders of people who have that legitimate authority. Then we're going to look, the second piece is also a strength of the explanation, the legitimacy of authority explanation, because it can explain what happened in aviation accidents. So aviation is aircraft, and in real life there was some voice data from the aircraft's black boxes involved in serious aircraft accidents found excessive dependence on the captain's authority from lower ranking crew. So in this situation, a real life situation, the crew accepted that definition of the situation from the captain. So they thought, well, the captain thinks everything's okay because he was or she is the legitimate authority figure, even when they kind of felt and knew the captain was taking a risky approach, which was recorded in the black box. So they may have voiced their concern to an equal ranking crew member to say, oh, I'm not sure about what the captain's doing, but they didn't question the authority of the captain directly, and that often ended in the aircraft having in this case, the aircraft had an accident, and some of those unfortunately were tragic. Another strength of the legitimacy of authority explanation is to do with that it can explain war crimes. Now this is really upsetting and quite, what's the word? No, I don't know what the word is. It's too late at night. So controversial, that's the word I'm looking for. The picture there that I have taken of a war crime is from a museum in Vietnam, because I didn't want to put any images on from the actual My Lai massacre which happened in Vietnam. And you can look up the details of this if you've got time after your revision. But the My Lai massacre in the Vietnam saw atrocious acts of criminal behaviour, absolutely horrendous. And the soldiers who were involved claimed to be just following the orders from the commanding officer, who was called William Calley. And William Calley himself claimed to be only following orders from higher legitimate authority within the US military. So the soldiers and the commanding officer themselves said that they acted on the orders of a higher legitimate authority, which can explain, some people would argue, could explain those war crimes that occurred. However, that is controversial. So, and this last evaluation point is saying actually it can't always explain war crimes. So explanations of obedience cannot explain what happened at the Jósefów Massacre. And the Jósefów Massacre happened during the war. So it was a mass killing of Jews by Police Battalion 101, who were Nazi police. And it was an atrocious war crime. However, neither the legitimacy of authority or agentic state explanations can explain their behaviour, because the commanding officer told them they could be assigned other duties. So in this situation, it wasn't that anybody was acting on behalf of anybody else, like the agentic state, and it wasn't like the Police Battalion 101 were following the orders of a commanding officer. It was actually that they had an opportunity not to do that, and some people decided not to, like a minority of the soldiers said no, they weren't going to do it. And Milgram suggested that in his experiment some participants had displayed cruelty, and so the Jósefów Massacre also can, it shows that some people had this desire to inflict the worst possible cruelty and pain upon other people. And it comes back to this idea that we've looked at in a different video about that you can't use the Milgram experiment to justify war crimes in Nazi Germany, and that it shouldn't be used as an alibi. So, and in this particular, the kind of like the way that this evaluation point should be used is saying those different explanations of obedience, both the agentic state and the legitimacy of authority, cannot explain the actions of Police Battalion 101. So I would recommend that you do some revision activities after watching this video. Revision in, which of course hopefully you know means just getting the content into your head. You could be creative, you could make mind maps or flashcards, videos, write up your notes. You could complete a comprehension task. So my students on MS Teams under files, under the social influence unit, you can download that handout SP30, which will give you a comprehension task. If you're not my student, then you can download any of the handouts in the description below. But don't just leave it at revision in. The revision out is how you're going to be successful in your exams. So you need to be doing, after you've got the content in, you need to get it out of you onto paper or onto your laptop, whatever you're using. So you could do the, if you've got the CAT textbook, it's on page 27, do the can you questions. If you've got the green hair book, I'm not sure what page that's on, but you can certainly write the 16 marker, discuss 2 explanations of obedience, and this video kind of follows the structure that would be useful for a 16 mark video. So you might want to just have a look through the order that I did the slides. I've given a bit of advice there on how to do evaluation, so you could pause the video and read that if you like.